Good morning, Stan here with no buts about it. I have another New York football update, this one about the New York Giants. Now, you've probably seen it already, but if you haven't, yesterday, Coach Brian Daboll, the head coach of the New York Giants, had been fired from the Giants organization. So he's no longer with them, and in his place is Mike Kafka, the offensive coordinator. Now, Mike Kafka used to be a quarterback in the league, but what made him, gave him his claim to fame, what helped him get his job that he had with the Giants as an OC and now is getting the chance with their as their head coach, is the fact that he was largely credited for developing Patrick Mahomes. Now, how much credit you want to give to him versus other parts of that coaching staff versus Mahomes itself, all up to your interpretation, but at the time, he was seen as a sort of architect behind the scenes with the Chiefs organization, with developing Patrick Mahomes, getting him game ready, helping him prepare for the defenses he was scheming against. So you have this guy who was very largely credited in the now, number one, number two quarterback in the league, developing into who he is. And for the Giants, this team that he's now taking over as the interim head coach, he has this opportunity to show if he could do it again with Jackson Dart. Now, a lot of people believe that Joe Schoen, the GM, is going to move on from Mike Kafka at the end of the season, but I actually see this more as a tryout of sorts. I think because of Kafka's name recognition and the fact that he's gotten quite a few head coach interviews over the last couple of seasons, he's a guy who probably another team will give that head coach opportunity to. If not, they'll at least give him a very highly paid, highly coveted offensive coordinator spot. So he's a very good name, very good coach, someone you might want to keep in the Giants organization. And I think that might be the reason why Schoen kept his job. Now, I thought Joe Schoen should have lost his job. I think he's equally as responsible for the now 3 consecutive years of bad football coming out of the New York Giants as Brian Daboll is. But Daboll getting fired to a lot is surprising due to the two facts. One is that he was a former coach of the year. More on that, we might see later in the season because Kevin Stefanski, another former coach of the year, kind of on the hot seat with the Cleveland Browns. So we might see 2 former coaches of the year lose their jobs in pretty recent times since their wins. And then moving on from that, when you look at this season, Jackson Dart, the brightest spot in the New York Giants organization, is someone who Daboll wanted to bring in and Joe Schoen did not want to bring in. So I think all of this together paints this picture that John Mara, the owner of the Giants, is trying to move on from Daboll without tearing everything apart. Because if you move on from Daboll and the GM, that means next year you're likely going to have a completely new staff and you're going to have to replace a lot of the players. Look at any team that gets a new GM and a new head coach in the same offseason, you end up seeing a much larger rebuild. So I think the fact that John Mara only fired or John Mara and Schoen only fired Daboll at this time, and John Mara did not want to move on from his GM, to me demonstrates that he has a lot of hope with this Jackson Dart vision, and why wouldn't he? Jackson Dart has been the best quarterback out of the rookie quarterbacks this year. Now, critics of this move have been bringing up the Dart and the Coach of the Year points as 2 reasons why the Giants should not move on from Daboll. But one that I'm thinking of is the fact that he is still a young quarterback. That to me is the most important thing when looking at Jackson Dart and that situation. So now you're going to have a second head coach with Mike Kafka. And if Schoen doesn't like him, you're going to see a third head coach with Jackson Dart entering into his second year. I think for a young quarterback, that can be a lot, and that definitely can hamper his development. We'll see how much that changes his perspective moving forward. For the Giants' sake and for Jackson Dart's, I hope he has a great career. I was such a big fan of him going into this draft, and I think he's going to really develop nicely as long as the Giants can try to keep a little bit of continuity through his rookie contract, right? If he could have just one more coach through the next 3 years, or 2 more coaches, Kafka and then someone else through the next 3 years of his contract, and then spend that time with the Giants, slowly growing, progressing, learning the system, I think he could develop very nicely. I still have a lot of hope in him. But I do think it's important to note that having a second and possibly third head coach entering your second season is in no means an easy task for a young quarterback to deal with. More on this later. Josh Butts will probably talk about this a little on the podcast this week. But for now, keep an eye on the Giants, keep an eye on Mike Kafka, because I do think this will be a tryout of sorts for the actual head coach spot that would be given to him this summer if he earns it. Thank you and have a great day.